I watched my stepsister Clarissa slip our dead mother's emerald ring into her Chanel purse, and I said nothing. In my past life, I would have screamed, begged, thrown myself at her feet. This time, I simply smiled and sipped my coffee, knowing exactly where that ring would end up by sunset. And knowing that in 3 days, I would walk into that pawn shop as someone she'd never recognize and buy back what was rightfully mine. Then I'd destroy her, just like she'd destroyed me before. The memory of my death was still fresh, even though I'd been living this second life for 6 months now. I could still feel the cold hospital sheets, still hear the steady beep of the heart monitor slowing down. I was 28 in my first life when the cancer finally won. 28 years old, dying alone in a sterile room while my father and stepmother attended Clarissa's engagement party. They hadn't visited once during my final month, not once. But death, as it turned out, wasn't the end. I'd opened my eyes to find myself back in my childhood bedroom, back in my 18-year-old body, with every memory of the next 10 years burned into my consciousness. I knew every betrayal that was coming, every lie, every theft, every moment of cruelty that would lead to my lonely death. This time, I would rewrite everything. It started the day my mother died, or rather, the day she died in both timelines. I was 12 years old when the car accident took her, leaving me alone with my father, Marcus Chen. In my first life, my father had mourned for exactly 6 months before bringing home Vanessa and her daughter Clarissa. I was too grief-stricken to see the warning signs, too desperate for family to recognize predators when they smiled at me. Vanessa had been beautiful, poised, and utterly ruthless. She'd married my father within a year, and from that moment on, she'd systematically worked to erase my mother's memory from our home and my existence from my father's life. My mother's photographs disappeared from the walls, her jewelry was accidentally donated, her recipes were replaced with Vanessa's preferences, and I, the grieving daughter, was slowly transformed into an unpaid servant in my own home. Clarissa had been worse. She was 2 years older than me, beautiful and charismatic where I was plain and shy. She'd taken one look at my father's wealth and decided that every dollar of his fortune should flow to her alone. She'd stolen my clothes and claimed I'd given them to her. She'd plagiarized my homework and won awards I'd earned. She'd even stolen my first boyfriend by telling him I'd been cheating on him with his best friend, a lie so elaborate I hadn't been able to disprove it. But the ring, my mother's ring, that had been the deepest cut of all. My mother's emerald engagement ring was a family heirloom, passed down through 4 generations of Chen women. It was worth a fortune, but its sentimental value was incalculable. My mother had made my father promise in front of witnesses that the ring would go to me on my 21st birthday. She'd even put it in her will. In my first life, that ring had never made it to my finger. On my 21st birthday, Vanessa had called me into the study with tears in her eyes. She'd told me that my father's company was in trouble, that they needed money desperately to save it, that they would lose everything if we couldn't come up with cash immediately. She'd begged me to let them pawn the ring temporarily just for a few months until the crisis passed. Then they'd buy it back, she'd promised. I'd get it back before my wedding day, she'd sworn. I'd believed her. God, I'd been so stupid. They'd pawned the ring for $20,000, a fraction of its actual worth of over $300,000. The pawn shop had been owned by one of Vanessa's cousins, I'd later discovered. The financial crisis had been completely fabricated. My father's company had been thriving. They'd used the money to pay for Clarissa's semester abroad in Paris. By the time I'd realized I'd been scammed, it was too late. Vanessa had claimed they'd tried to retrieve the ring, but someone else had bought it. She'd cried and apologized and promised to buy me a replacement. That replacement had never materialized. When I'd tried to track down the ring myself, I'd hit dead end after dead end. The pawn shop had no record of who'd purchased it, or so they'd claimed. Years later, shortly before my death, I'd seen Clarissa wearing it in a photograph from her wedding, my mother's ring, on my stepsister's finger as she married a wealthy CEO and lived the life that should have been mine. I'd confronted her about it in a private message, and she'd blocked me without responding. I'd told my father, and he'd accused me of lying, of being jealous, of trying to ruin his stepdaughter's happiness. I'd died 3 months later, alone and unloved, while they'd probably been planning their next vacation. But now I was back. Now I knew the truth, and now I could stop it. The key was that I remembered the exact date, June 15th. That was when Vanessa would manufacture her crisis and beg me for the ring. In my first life, I'd handed it over immediately, desperate to help, desperate to be seen as a good daughter. This time, I'd prepared differently. I'd spent the 6 months since my rebirth carefully rebuilding relationships, gathering resources, and laying groundwork for my revenge. I'd reconnected with my mother's family, particularly my maternal grandmother, Helena Wu. In my first life, Vanessa had systematically cut me off from my mother's relatives, claiming they were too grief-stricken to see me, that visiting them would be too painful for everyone. I'd believed her, and by the time I was old enough to reach out on my own, the relationships had withered from years of neglect. This time, I'd called grandmother Helena the week after my rebirth and told her I missed her. She'd wept on the phone and invited me to visit immediately. When I'd arrived at her Shanghai penthouse, I'd found a woman who'd been desperately trying to maintain contact with me for years. Every letter intercepted by Vanessa, every phone call blocked, every gift returned unopened. Grandmother Helena was the founder of Wu Cosmetics, a billion-dollar empire. She was powerful, connected, and absolutely furious when I carefully, tearfully revealed the truth about my home life. I didn't tell her about my rebirth, that would have been too much. But I told her about the favoritism, the neglect, the way Vanessa had isolated me from my mother's memory. She'd believed me instantly, and she'd offered me an escape route. "Live with me," she'd said, gripping my hands. "Leave that house. I'll hire the best lawyers. We'll fight for custody." But I'd declined, as tempting as it was. I needed to stay in that house. I needed to be there to watch them try to steal from me again. I needed to catch them in the act. Revenge required proximity. Instead, I'd asked grandmother Helena for something else. A trust fund in my name, inaccessible to my father or stepmother, that I could draw upon when I turned 21. She'd set it up immediately, depositing 50 million yuan with instructions to her lawyers that not a cent could be touched by anyone but me. She'd also given me a credit card with a substantial limit for emergencies. "If you need anything at all, you call me," she'd said. "And I lost your mother. I won't lose you too." I'd also reconnected with my mother's younger brother, my Uncle James. He was an investigative journalist with connections throughout the city's underground networks. When I'd casually mentioned wanting to learn more about pawn shops and how they operated, he'd raised an eyebrow but provided me with a comprehensive education. I'd learned which shops were legitimate, which were fronts for money laundering, and which ones kept meticulous records that could be subpoenaed. Most importantly, he taught me how to conduct a proper investigation. The third piece of my preparation had been the most satisfying. I'd started documenting everything, every insult, every chore demanded of me, every time Clarissa took something of mine without asking. I'd installed a small camera in my bedroom hidden in a stuffed animal that recorded every time someone entered without permission. I'd started keeping a detailed journal with dates, times, and witnesses. I'd begun building a case, but I'd also worked on myself. In my first life, I'd been passive, desperate for approval, willing to accept any scrap of affection. This time, I'd studied psychology, manipulation tactics, and strategic planning through every book I could find. I'd learned to school my expressions, to hide my thoughts, to play the role of the grateful stepdaughter while planning my moves 3 steps ahead. I'd also hired a private investigator, paid for by grandmother Helena's emergency credit card, to look into Vanessa's background. What he'd found had been illuminating. Vanessa had been married twice before my father, both times to wealthy widowers with children. Both previous marriages had ended in divorce after she'd successfully alienated the men from their children and drained significant assets. She had a pattern. My father was just her latest mark. The investigator had also confirmed my suspicions about the pawn shop. It was indeed owned by Vanessa's cousin, and they had a history of conducting fraudulent transactions together. In my first life, I'd discovered this too late. This time, I had proof before the crime was even committed, which brought me to today, June 15th, the day Vanessa would make her move. I'd been prepared since breakfast, wearing a wire-thin recording device hidden under my shirt. Another gift from Uncle James, who'd assumed I was just being paranoid about my step-family but had been supportive anyway. The device was voice-activated and would capture every word of our conversation. Vanessa found me in the garden after lunch, just as she had in my first life. She was alone, having sent Clarissa shopping and my father to his office. Her face was arranged in an expression of deep concern, and if I hadn't known better, I might have believed she was genuinely distressed. "Arya, sweetheart, can we talk?" she asked, sitting beside me on the stone bench. I looked up from my book, a romance novel I wasn't actually reading, and smiled. "Of course, Vanessa. Is something wrong?" She took a deep breath, and I watched her prepare her performance. In my first life, this moment had destroyed me. Now I was curious to see if she'd use the exact same script. She did. "I don't know how to tell you this," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Your father didn't want me to say anything. He's so proud, you know. But I can't keep this from you. We're family, and family doesn't keep secrets." I waited, letting her build her momentum. "The company is in trouble, Arya. Serious trouble. There was a deal that fell through, and now we're facing some significant debt. If we don't come up with cash immediately, and I mean immediately within the next few days, we could lose everything. The house, the business, all of it." I let my eyes widen with concern. "Oh no, that's terrible. Does Dad know what to do?" "He's exploring options, but..." She trailed off, then reached over to take my hand. Her skin was cold. "Arya, I hate to even bring this up. I know how much your mother's ring means to you, but it's just sitting in that safe, and we're in such desperate need. If we could just pawn it temporarily, just for a few months until we get back on our feet, it would save the family, save your father's legacy, save everything your mother would have wanted protected." There it was. The same guilt trip, the same manipulation, appealing to my love for my dead mother to steal her most precious gift to me. In my first life, I'd agreed. Immediately, tears streaming down my face, desperate to help. This time, I let myself pause. Let her see me struggle with the decision. It was important that this feel real. I don't know, Vanessa," I said slowly. "That ring is all I have left of her. The will specifically said..." "I know what the will said," Vanessa interrupted, her voice sharpening slightly before she caught herself and softened it again. "And you'll get it back. I promise. We'll buy it back the moment we can. You'll have it for your 21st birthday, just like your mother wanted. This is just temporary. Just a short-term solution to save the family." I bit my lip, appearing to consider it. "How much money do you need?" 20,000 yuan would cover the immediate debt," she said quickly. Too quickly. She'd already researched what the pawn shop would offer. "The ring is worth so much more, of course, but we only need enough to bridge this gap." "And you're sure you can get it back?" "Absolutely certain. Arya, I swear to you on everything I hold dear, you will get that ring back. I would never let anything happen to your mother's ring. Never." The lie dripped from her lips like honey, and I marveled at how easily she lied. How many times had she done this before? How many other families had she defrauded? I let my shoulders slump in defeat. "Okay," I whispered. If it helps Dad, if it saves the family, but..." "Okay, but you have to promise me I'll get it back." "I promise," she said, pulling me into a hug that made my skin crawl. "Thank you, Arya. You're saving this family. Your mother would be so proud of you." The irony was almost too much. My mother would have been horrified. An hour later, we were at the safe in my father's study. Vanessa had the combination, of course she did, and she opened it with practiced ease. Inside was a small velvet box, and inside that box was my mother's ring. The emerald caught the light, glowing with an inner fire that made my chest ache. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. Vanessa reached for it, but I got there first. Can I hold it one last time before we pawn it?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, sweetheart." I lifted the ring from its box and slipped it onto my finger. It fit perfectly, just as it had in my dreams. My mother's ring, on my hand where it belonged. For a moment, the anger and grief overwhelmed me, and I had to fight back real tears. Then I took it off and handed it to Vanessa, watching as she dropped it into her purse without ceremony. No reverence, no respect, just another transaction. "I'll take care of this today," she said. "You won't regret this, Arya." But I would. In my first life, I'd regretted it every single day for the next 7 years. This time would be different. After Vanessa left, claiming she needed to handle this financial matter immediately, I went to my room and called Uncle James. She took the bait, I told him. She's heading to the pawn shop now. You're sure about this? He asked. Once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure, I said. I've never been more sure of anything. All right then, I'll have my contact at the shop ready. They'll document everything, take photos, record the transaction. We'll have proof of the actual value versus what she claims to you later. And I've got a tail on her. We'll know exactly what she does with the money. Thank you, Uncle James. Thank your grandmother, he said. She's the one funding this operation. And Arya, she's really proud of you. We all are. I hung up and sat on my bed, staring at my empty finger where the ring had been. 3 days. In 3 days, I would go to that pawn shop disguised and prepared, and I would buy back what was mine. Then the real game would begin. True to form, Vanessa returned that evening with red-rimmed eyes and a tragic expression. She found me in the kitchen, where I was preparing dinner, one of my many unofficial duties in the household. Oh, Arya, she said, her voice breaking. I have the money. Your father's business is saved. You saved us all. I turned to her, wiping my hands on a dish towel. That's wonderful. So when do we get the ring back? She looked away. Soon. Very soon. They gave us a very fair loan, and we'll be able to retrieve it within a few months at most. Can I have the pawn ticket just to keep it safe? Her eyes flickered with something, annoyance, suspicion, before she smiled. Of course, let me get it for you. She returned 5 minutes later with a crumpled ticket that looked hastily printed. I examined it carefully, memorizing the details. The pawn shop's name was Golden Fortune Pawnbrokers, Vanessa's cousin's shop, just as I'd known it would be. The date was today's date. The amount listed was 20,000 yuan. The ring was valued at 350,000. Thank you for doing this, Vanessa said, squeezing my shoulder. You're such a good daughter. Your father would be lost without you. Where is Dad? I asked. I'd like to talk to him about what happened. He's working late, she said quickly, but the crisis really shook him. He needs some time to recover. Let's not bother him with the details, okay? He's embarrassed enough about the financial trouble. Of course, can't let me talk to my father, can't let me verify the story. In my first life, by the time I'd tried to discuss it with my father, weeks had passed and Vanessa had already convinced him it was all handled. He'd barely remembered the details. This time, I would make sure he remembered everything. Over the next 3 days, I watched Vanessa like a hawk. Uncle James's investigation confirmed what I'd suspected. There had been no financial crisis. My father's company was thriving, pulling in record profits. The 20,000 yuan had been deposited directly into Clarissa's account the same day Vanessa pawned the ring. Clarissa had used it to pay off her credit card debt, the result of an extravagant shopping spree in Tokyo, and to book a luxury vacation to the Maldives. My mother's heirloom had been pawned to pay for my stepsister's vacation. Meanwhile, I prepared my disguise. With grandmother Helena's help, I'd hired a professional makeup artist who specialized in theatrical transformations. She taught me how to contour my face to change its shape, how to use colored contacts to alter my eye color, how to style a wig so it looked natural. I practiced for hours until I could transform myself from plain, overlooked Arya into someone completely different. For the pawn shop visit, I became Michelle Zhang, a sophisticated woman in her 30s, dressed in designer clothes borrowed from grandmother Helena's closet, with my hair styled in an elegant updo and my face made up to look mature and authoritative. I wore sunglasses and carried a Hermes bag. I looked like exactly the kind of wealthy client a pawn shop would be delighted to serve. On the 3rd day after the ring was pawned, I walked into Golden Fortune Pawnbrokers with my head held high. The shop was exactly as Uncle James had described it. Small, cluttered, with bars over the windows and a suspicious-looking owner who eyed me with obvious interest when he saw my clothes and accessories. Good afternoon, I said in Mandarin, using a slightly different accent than my normal speech. I'm interested in purchasing some jewelry. I heard you sometimes have unique estate pieces. The owner, Vanessa's cousin, though I pretended not to know, perked up immediately. Yes, yes. We have many beautiful pieces. What kind of jewelry are you looking for? Emeralds, I said. I'm particularly interested in emeralds. Vintage settings, if you have them. His eyes lit up with unmistakable greed. Actually, we just received a very special piece. An emerald engagement ring. Very old, very fine quality. Would you like to see it? Please. He disappeared into the back and returned with a familiar velvet box. My heart clenched when he opened it and I saw my mother's ring again, displayed like any other piece of merchandise. I picked it up carefully, examining it as if I were any other buyer. It's lovely. What's the price? 40,000 yuan, he said quickly. Twice what they'd paid Vanessa, of course. I pretended to consider it, turning the ring in the light. It is beautiful, but I'd need to have it appraised before making such a purchase. Can you tell me anything about its provenance? He hesitated. It came from a private seller. No papers, I'm afraid. But I can assure you it's genuine. I'm sure it is, I said smoothly. I'd still like to have my jeweler examine it. Would you be willing to hold it for me for 24 hours while I arrange that? I can hold it for a deposit of 10,000 yuan, he said. I smiled and pulled out Grandmother Helena's credit card. That's acceptable. The transaction took only minutes. I had a receipt, a promise that the ring would be held for me, and a recording of the entire conversation. Uncle James had equipped me with another wire. Tomorrow, I would return with my jeweler, actually one of Grandmother Helena's lawyers, and complete the purchase with full documentation. But I had one more stop to make today. I left the pawn shop and walked 3 blocks to a small cafe where Uncle James was waiting. I slid into the booth across from him and pulled off my sunglasses. It went perfectly, I told him. He's holding it for me. We can complete the purchase tomorrow. Good, Uncle James said. And I finished my investigation into the money trail. I have bank statements showing the deposit into Clarissa's account, receipts from her vacation booking, and credit card statements proving there was never any business crisis. Your father's company is in excellent financial health, always has been. Can we prove that Vanessa knew about the company's status? Better. I found emails between her and your father where he explicitly mentions how well the business is doing. The emails are dated 3 days before she pawned your ring. She absolutely knew there was no financial crisis. I leaned back in the booth, feeling a grim satisfaction settle over me. Then we have everything we need. Almost everything, Uncle James corrected. We need one more piece, proof that they never intended to return the ring. That's the piece that will make this not just theft, but fraud. I smiled slowly. I think I know how to get that. That evening, I called a family dinner, something I'd never done before. I used my father's own phone to send out the message, claiming he'd requested everyone be present to discuss something important. When everyone gathered around the dining table looking confused, I served the meal I'd prepared and waited until everyone had food in front of them. Then I pulled out the crumpled pawn ticket. Vanessa, I said sweetly, I was wondering if we could talk about getting Mom's ring back. It's been 3 days. Do you think we could go to the pawn shop tomorrow and retrieve it? Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Across the table, I saw Clarissa's eyes widen slightly. Interesting. So Clarissa knew about the pawning. Oh, sweetie, Vanessa said, recovering quickly. I'm so sorry. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. The situation is a bit more complicated than we thought. We need a little more time to gather the funds to retrieve it. My father looked up, confused. Retrieve what? What ring? I turned to him with wide, innocent eyes. Mom's emerald ring, Dad. Didn't Vanessa tell you? We had to pawn it to save the company from bankruptcy. The confusion on my father's face deepened into shock. Bankruptcy? What are you talking about? The company isn't… Marcus, we can discuss this later, Vanessa started. But but I cut her off. Vanessa told me the company was in desperate financial trouble, I continued, speaking directly to my father. She said we needed 20,000 yuan immediately, or we'd lose everything. She asked me to pawn Mom's ring to save the business. She promised we'd get it back in a few months. My father's face was turning red. Says, the company isn't in financial trouble. We just closed our biggest deal of the year. Vanessa, what is she talking about? Marcus, please, let's not do this now. Answer me. His voice cracked like a whip. Did you take Arya's ring? Vanessa's composure was cracking. It was a temporary measure. We needed some quick cash for an unexpected expense. What expense? He demanded. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She had no answer prepared for this scenario. In my first life, this confrontation had never happened. I'd been too cowed, too eager to believe her promises, too afraid to rock the boat. Clarissa chose that moment to stand up, her chair scraping loudly. I need to go, she said quickly. Sit down, Clarissa, my father said, his voice deadly quiet. I want to know where that 20,000 yuan went. Clarissa sat, her face pale. I decided to twist the knife a little deeper. I just want to make sure we can get the ring back, I said, my voice small and worried, the perfect impression of a concerned daughter. Vanessa promised. The pawn ticket is from Golden Fortune Pawnbrokers. We can go tomorrow, right? As long as we have the money to retrieve it? I watched Vanessa's face carefully, looking for the tell I'd seen in my previous life. That slight tightening around her eyes that meant she was about to lie. Actually, she said slowly, I received some bad news today. The pawn shop informed me that someone else has already put down a deposit on the ring. They're planning to purchase it. I'm so sorry, Arya. I tried to get there first, but... What? My father's voice was thunderous. You let someone else buy your stepdaughter's mother's ring? A ring that was supposed to be held for us? I didn't have the money to hold it, Vanessa said, and now her voice was rising too, defensive. I used the money to... She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to confess to the real use of the funds. To what? My father demanded. Where did the money go, Vanessa? In the silence that followed, Clarissa's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively, then paled further. I knew what that message probably said. Something from the travel agency about her upcoming vacation. The vacation she'd booked with the money from my mother's ring. My father noticed her reaction too. He was a successful businessman, not stupid. Just willfully blind when it came to his wife and stepdaughter. But even willful blindness had its limits. Clarissa, he said quietly, do you know where that money went? Clarissa looked at her mother desperately. Tell him, I said softly. Tell him about the Maldives trip. Tell him about the credit card debt. Tell him the truth. The table erupted. My father demanded answers. Vanessa tried to control the narrative, spinning explanations and excuses. Clarissa burst into tears, claiming she didn't know the money came from pawning my ring, that her mother had told her it was a gift. The lies tangled together, contradicting each other, falling apart under my father's increasingly furious questioning. I sat quietly, eating my dinner, watching my carefully laid plans unfold exactly as I'd designed them. Finally, my father slammed his hand on the table. Enough! Everyone stop talking. Arya, go to your room. I need to speak with my wife privately. I stood, picking up my plate. Of course, Dad, but do you think we could go to the pawn shop tomorrow? I really want to get Mom's ring back if we can, even if we have to pay extra. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. Yes, he said. We'll go first thing in the morning. I'll pay whatever it takes. I nodded and left, but not before I saw the look of panic on Vanessa's face. She knew what we'd find at that pawn shop. She knew the truth was about to come out. What she didn't know was that I'd already bought the ring and that tomorrow's visit would be the first domino in a cascade that would destroy her completely. That night, I could hear the shouting from my parents' bedroom. My father's voice, Vanessa's voice, accusations and denials flying back and forth. I put in earbuds and listened to music, smiling to myself. This was only the beginning. The next morning, my father was waiting for me at breakfast, looking exhausted but determined. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. "Get dressed," he told me. "We're going to get your ring back." We drove to Golden Fortune Pawnbrokers in silence. When we arrived, I let my father take the lead, following behind him like the dutiful daughter I was supposed to be. The shop owner recognized me immediately, or rather, he recognized the outfit I was wearing from yesterday. His eyes widened in alarm. "Mr. Chen," he said nervously, glancing between my father and me. "What can I do for you?" "I'm here to retrieve an emerald ring that was pawned 3 days ago," my father said, pulling out the pawn ticket. "I have the ticket and I'm prepared to pay whatever is necessary." The owner licked his lips. "Ah, yes, that ring. I'm afraid there's been a complication. A buyer has already placed a deposit." "I'll pay double whatever they offered," my father interrupted. "Name your price." "Sir, I've already accepted the deposit. I can't in good faith." "Triple. I'll pay triple what they offered." The owner looked anguished, glancing at me again. He knew who I was now, knew that the sophisticated buyer from yesterday and the girl standing in front of him today were the same person. He was caught in a trap, and he knew it. "Perhaps," I said quietly, we could call the buyer and see if they'd be willing to withdraw their offer, if it's really that important." The owner seized on this lifeline. Yes, let me call them right now." He disappeared into the back room, and I heard his voice, muffled, speaking urgently in Mandarin. A moment later, he returned with his phone, holding it out to me. "The buyer would like to speak with you," he said. I took the phone, putting it on speaker so my father could hear. "Hello?" "Hello, Arya," said my own voice from the phone, a recording I'd made yesterday and given to Uncle James to play when the shop owner called. "This is Michelle Zhang. I understand you're trying to retrieve your mother's ring." My father's eyes widened as he recognized the setup. The recording continued. "I purchased this ring because I believed it was being sold legitimately. However, after conducting research into its provenance, I've discovered some concerning facts. The ring is a family heirloom that was pawned under false pretenses, taken from a minor by her stepmother, who fabricated a financial crisis to justify the pawning. The money from the pawning was then used not to save a business, but to pay for personal expenses for the stepmother's daughter." The shop owner was sweating now. "As someone who values family heritage and ethical business practices, I cannot in good conscience complete this purchase. I'm withdrawing my deposit and returning the ring to its rightful owner. However, I've documented everything about this transaction, including the ring's true value of 350,000 yuan compared to the 20,000 it was pawned for, which represents a significant undervaluation, suggesting potential fraud." My father turned to stare at me, and I met his gaze steadily. The recording finished. "I've forwarded all documentation to my lawyers. They'll be in touch regarding potential legal action against all parties involved in this fraudulent transaction." "Good day." The line went dead. The shop owner looked like he might faint. "I didn't know, sir," he stammered. "My cousin said it was a legitimate. I didn't realize." "Your cousin," my father repeated slowly. "Let me guess, Vanessa is your cousin?" The man's silence was answer enough. "Give me the ring," my father said, his voice cold, "and the full documentation of this transaction. Every piece of paper, every receipt, every record. And then I suggest you close this shop and find a new line of work because I'm reporting you to every regulatory body I can think of." 30 minutes later, we left the pawn shop with my mother's ring, a thick folder of documentation, and a recording of the shop owner confessing to his role in the fraud. My father had paid 40,000 yuan, the full purchase price I'd arranged, and gotten a receipt for every yuan. We sat in the car in silence for a long moment. Then my father turned to me. "You set this up," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted. "I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed you to see the truth. Vanessa has been stealing from me for years, Dad. This was just the most blatant example." "Years?" His voice cracked. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of documentation I'd been building. I have evidence of everything. The camera footage of Clarissa taking my clothes, the journal entries documenting the chores I do while they shop, the plagiarism of my homework, the lies she told my boyfriend. All of it. I handed him the phone and watched his face as he scrolled through months of evidence. With each swipe, he seemed to age 10 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "I tried, Dad, multiple times. But Vanessa was always there, always explaining it away, always making it sound like I was exaggerating or being dramatic. You wanted to believe her. You wanted your new family to work, so you believed her instead of me." He closed his eyes, and I saw tears leak from under his lids. "I'm so sorry, Arya. I'm so, so sorry." "I know," I said. And I did. My father wasn't evil, just weak, easily manipulated, desperate for companionship after my mother's death. Vanessa had seen that weakness and exploited it. "But Dad, it's not over. Vanessa and Clarissa need to face consequences for what they've done. Real consequences." He opened his eyes and looked at me, and for the first time since my mother's death, I saw real steel in his gaze. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to trust me," I said, and I need you to be strong. Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. "I can." We drove home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This was the silence of two people preparing for war. When we arrived home, Vanessa was waiting in the foyer, dressed immaculately and wearing an expression of concern. "Did you get the ring?" she asked, as if she didn't know the answer. My father walked past her without a word, heading for his study. I followed, but not before I saw the flash of fear in Vanessa's eyes. In the study, my father made 3 phone calls. The first was to his lawyer. The second was to his accountant, requesting a full audit of all family accounts and expenditures for the past 6 years. The third was to his company's head of security, requesting background checks on both Vanessa and Clarissa. I stood by the window, turning my mother's ring over in my fingers. It was back where it belonged, but this was just the beginning. We had won the battle, but the war was still ahead. Over the next 2 weeks, the truth unraveled like a ball of yarn. The accountant's audit revealed that over 300,000 yuan had been diverted from family accounts over the past 6 years, money that was supposed to be for my education, my clothes, my general welfare. Instead, it had funded Clarissa's lifestyle. Designer bags, luxury vacations, a new car, expensive jewelry. Every penny that should have gone to me had gone to her instead. The background check revealed that Vanessa had a criminal record in another province, petty theft and fraud, that she'd carefully concealed during her courtship of my father. She'd legally changed her name after her second divorce, which is why his initial background check had come up clean. More damning still were the emails Uncle James had uncovered. In them, Vanessa and her cousin who owned the pawn shop discussed their scheme explicitly. Pawn the ring for a fraction of its value, hold it for a few days, then have a buyer purchase it. That buyer would be Clarissa, using a shell company. The ring would remain in the family, technically. I would never get it back, and they'd have access to cash immediately while maintaining the fiction that they'd tried to retrieve it. It had been premeditated theft, carefully planned and executed, and it had almost worked. My father filed for divorce within the week. He also filed criminal charges against Vanessa for fraud and theft. The evidence was overwhelming: the pawn shop records, the emails, the financial audit, the recording of Vanessa admitting there was no business crisis. His lawyers were confident they could secure not just a divorce, but a criminal conviction. For Clarissa, my father took a different approach. She was legally an adult, but still dependent on Vanessa. He gave her a choice: cooperate with the investigation and testify against her mother, or be named as a co-conspirator in the fraud charges. She could also return everything she'd purchased with stolen money, or he'd sue her in civil court for every yuan. Clarissa chose self-preservation. She testified against Vanessa, returned most of the expensive items she'd bought, and moved out of our house within 3 days. I heard later that she'd moved back in with her biological father, who'd been more than happy to tell her exactly what he thought of her behavior. Vanessa fought back, of course. She hired an expensive lawyer and claimed she'd been acting in the family's best interests, that there had been a misunderstanding, that she'd planned to return the ring all along. Her lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive stepdaughter, making false accusations. That strategy lasted until Uncle James published his investigative report. He'd been working on it for weeks, using the evidence I'd gathered and his own investigative sources. The article ran in a major newspaper under the headline, "The Black Widow: How One Woman Built a Career on Defrauding Wealthy Widowers." It detailed Vanessa's pattern of behavior across 3 marriages, included interviews with the children from her previous marriages who'd also been financially abused, and laid out the evidence of her schemes in meticulous detail. The article went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by news outlets across the country. Vanessa's face was everywhere, identified as a con artist and thief. Her lawyer dropped her case. Her friends, what few she'd had, disappeared. Even her own family began distancing themselves from her. The criminal trial was almost anticlimactic. With Clarissa's testimony, the documentary evidence, and the public sentiment firmly against her, Vanessa's defense collapsed. She was convicted of fraud and grand theft and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge's remarks at sentencing were scathing, noting that she'd exploited a grieving child for financial gain and shown no remorse for her actions. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Vanessa could see me. I wanted her to know who had beaten her. I wanted her to understand that the overlooked, underestimated stepdaughter had been smarter, stronger, and more patient than she'd ever imagined. On the day of sentencing, as the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, Vanessa finally looked at me directly. In her eyes, I saw fury, disbelief, and something else: recognition. She finally saw me clearly, saw the mind that had orchestrated her downfall. It was deeply satisfying. But I wasn't done yet. My father, to his credit, spent the months during the trial trying to make amends. He couldn't undo 6 years of neglect, but he tried. He set up a trust fund in my name with 10 million yuan, money that Vanessa had stolen, now returned with interest and penalties. He gave me my mother's jewelry collection, which had been stored in Vanessa's safe deposit box. He introduced me to his business partners and started training me to eventually take over the company. Most importantly, he listened. When I told him about the loneliness, the feeling of being erased from my own family, the way Vanessa had systematically isolated me from my mother's memory, he listened, and he believed me, and he apologized over and over for not seeing it sooner. I forgave him eventually. Not immediately, he didn't deserve immediate forgiveness. But over time, as he proved through his actions that he meant his apologies, I let go of some of the anger. Grandmother Helena was thrilled with how everything had turned out, though she was furious it had been necessary in the first place. She insisted on throwing me a party for my 21st birthday, the birthday when I was supposed to receive my mother's ring. The party was held at her Shanghai penthouse with over 200 guests, family members I'd been denied contact with for years, my father's business associates, friends from school, and even Uncle James and his journalist colleagues. It was extravagant and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. At midnight, Grandmother Helena called for silence and brought me to the center of the room. 21 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room, my daughter gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She loved that girl more than life itself, and before she died, she made one request, that her daughter would receive her engagement ring on her 21st birthday as a symbol of the love and legacy she was leaving behind. She turned to my father, who stepped forward holding the velvet box. That ring took a detour, Grandmother Helena continued, and there was steel in her voice. It was stolen by people who should have protected this girl, but through her own intelligence, courage, and determination, my granddaughter recovered what was hers. She fought for herself when others wouldn't fight for her. She saved herself. My father opened the box, and my mother's emerald ring caught the light, glowing like a green star. Arya, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. Your mother wanted you to have this. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I didn't protect it, and you, the way I should have. But you're wearing it now, and you'll never have to fight for it again. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and the room erupted in applause. I looked down at my hand, at my mother's ring where it belonged, and I felt something tight in my chest finally release. This was my inheritance, my legacy, my mother's love made tangible, and I'd earned it. Not because it was given to me, but because I'd fought for it, because I'd been smart enough, strong enough, and strategic enough to take back what was mine. The party continued late into the night. I danced with my father, who cried as he told me how proud my mother would be. I laughed with my cousins, who I was finally getting to know. I accepted congratulations and well wishes from dozens of people who had only learned of my existence in the past few months. And through it all, I wore my mother's ring, feeling its weight on my finger like a promise kept. The epilogue of my revenge came a year later. I was 22, enrolled in university studying business management, and living in an apartment grandmother Helena had bought for me. I was thriving, making friends, excelling in my classes, learning to manage the fortune I'd inherited from my mother's side of the family. My father and I had dinner once a week, slowly rebuilding our relationship. Life was good. Then I got a letter from Clarissa. She'd written it from the small apartment she shared with 3 roommates, where she was working 2 retail jobs to make ends meet. Her biological father had cut her off after a year, tired of supporting her expensive lifestyle. She'd burned through her savings and discovered that without her mother's schemes or a wealthy stepfather, she had no way to maintain the life she'd become accustomed to. The letter was full of apologies. She was sorry for stealing from me, sorry for the lies, sorry for the years of cruelty. She claimed she'd been manipulated by her mother, that she hadn't understood what they were doing was wrong, that she'd changed. The last paragraph was the real reason for the letter. She needed money. Just a loan, she said, just enough to pay her rent for a few months while she got back on her feet. She'd pay me back, she promised. She just needed help. I read the letter 3 times, then I burned it. I didn't respond, I didn't send money, I didn't help her. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Just as Vanessa was living with hers, I'd heard through the grapevine that prison was not being kind to her, that her former victims' families had made sure word of her crimes spread throughout the facility. As for me, I was finally free. Free from their manipulation, free from their theft, free from their cruelty. I had my mother's ring, my family's fortune, my father's support, and my own hard-won strength. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it to reclaim everything that had been stolen from me. Not just material things, though those mattered, but also my dignity, my agency, my place in my own family. I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out over the Shanghai skyline, and I thought about the girl I'd been in my first life. Weak, desperate, dying alone. Then I looked at the woman I'd become, strong, independent, surrounded by people who loved me. Rebirth had given me a second chance, but I'd earned my happy ending all by myself. The ring on my finger caught the light, emerald green like hope, like spring, like new beginnings. My mother's ring, mine forever, and nobody would ever take it from me again. Years later, when I took over my father's company and merged it with my grandmother's cosmetics empire, creating one of the largest business conglomerates in China, I kept my mother's ring in a safe in my office. Not because I was afraid someone would steal it, I wore excellent reproductions when I went out, but because it was too precious to risk losing. Sometimes, when I was working late on a particularly difficult deal or facing a challenging decision, I'd take the ring out and hold it. I'd remember that 12-year-old girl who'd lost her mother, that 18-year-old girl who'd been given a second chance, that 21-year-old woman who'd fought to reclaim her heritage. The ring reminded me that I came from strength, that love could survive death, that justice, while sometimes delayed, could still be achieved, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting what was stolen from you. It's becoming so successful that the thieves can only watch from prison cells and poverty as you thrive without them. That was my mother's final gift to me. Not just a ring, but the legacy of resilience it represented. And I wore it well.